Okay, hello everyone. I am your host, Kaylee Batesman, the content director at She Can Code. For those tuning in who aren't familiar with us, She Can Code is a collaborative community working together to tackle the tech gender gap. You can join our community platform to find a supportive network of like-minded individuals, find new opportunities and guidance to help you to excel in your tech career. Before I introduce our speakers, please note that we have a live Q&A session running throughout today. So please submit your questions and we will try and get to them at the end. So let's kick off with my wonderful panel of guests for today. I have Jake McCambley, software engineer at zencare.co, attended a TripleTen bootcamp. We have Rachel McElroy, marketing director at Axiologik. We have Tim Harlow, chief revenue officer at Templeton and Partners. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the panel. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to kick off with a few introductions so our audience know a little bit about you, if that is okay. Jake, can we hear from you first? A little bit about you to set the scene. Absolutely.
Thanks, Kaylee. So, hey, everybody. I'm Jake. I live in New Hampshire in the United States. I attended TripleTen back in 2021 into 2022. Post-pandemic, was hoping to do a career switch around that time. I fortunately landed a job after I attended TripleTen, and now I work for Zencare.co, which is a company in the United States that helps people find therapists and helps therapists market to potential clients.
Perfect. Wonderful. And we're really looking forward to hearing your insights today because being based in a different part of the world, we're going to love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Rachel, yourself, a little bit about you, please.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Rachel McElroy. I'm marketing director at Axiologik, and Axiologik are a advanced digital delivery consultancy. We specialise in delivering large, complex programs of change. I've worked in tech marketing for about 10 years, and I've worked all over the country as well, and juggled lots of things. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today, and finding out people's own experience on the topic.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yes, and for somebody that's worked in different places around the country, you're also going to have unique insights into working in the UK and finding talent outside of major cities. Tim, yourself, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Tim Harlow from Templeton and Partners. I've been recruiting tech people since about 1990. So before the days of Jake's technology, that's for sure. My career has led me across Europe, across the US, across India, and across the Far East, in setting up offices in different locations, both remote and on site. So hopefully with some good experience of some of the topics we've got to talk about today.
Amazing. So global point of view, and also you mentioned earlier in our chat together that you also have personal insights into this as well, that you live remotely and then you come into the city as well. So it's going to be a good discussion today amongst all of you. We're going to kick off with a question about strategies around this topic. So Rachel, can I go to you first in terms of what strategies have you found successful in recruiting and retaining top talent in regions outside of major cities? All companies think you have to go for major cities. Have you found any any strategies successful in recruiting top talent outside of major cities?
Okay, thank you. So we're based in the city centre of Leeds, but our team are fairly spread out in outlying sort of towns and villages and things like that. I think the key for me, and I probably would say this as I'm obviously working marketing, but it's about employee branding. What are you bringing to the table as an employer? How are you attracting people? What does that experience feel like? Why would people want to come and work for you? And I feel like you do have to be in a bit of in a hub. Transport is really, really important. Hybrid working is obviously key, but actually how does it feel? We all want to delight our customers, but actually how does it feel for your employees to come and work for you? How easy do you make it for them to live in surrounding areas? Not everybody wants to live in a city centre, and what does that feel like? How does it work from a hybrid perspective? How do you engage people? How do you create that sort of team culture? I think that's something that we've really focused on, as we've got a fairly scattered team we're a fairly new company. We've only been going for sort of 6 years, so we're still, you know, growing, and building that sort of culture and engagement is really, really key. So I think employee branding, you know, an employee brand is key. You know, what are you bringing to the table that's going to attract people from different places? Because if you're always fishing in the same pool, which Tim will know from doing recruiting, you're always going to get the same kind of people, and that makes it quite difficult, you know, to recruit really. It's, you know, it's kind of easy stuff. It's not rocket science, but as much as you have to have obviously the right job roles for people and the right salaries and things like that, but actually what else are you bringing to the table that's going to make people make the effort to want to come and work for you, and, you know, and be in those sort of feeder towns and villages where they, you know, in Leeds, people could go to work in Manchester, massive tech hub. They could go down to London, but actually how are you attracting those people to come to you, to want to come to you? I think that's really key.
Yeah, I love the fact that you mentioned how it makes somebody feel, because actually work is a lot more than just thinking. You mentioned transport. It's actually a little bit more than, can I jump on a train? Is my commute a reasonable length? Do I pay too much money perhaps to commute and a lot of my salary disappears? And it more of that comes down to actually the feeling of, how do I feel when I arrive at work every day? Do I want to keep going? Do I want to keep doing that? Do I feel like I fit into a team where everybody else is experiencing something similar? Or I remember before the pandemic, when hybrid working wasn't really a thing, there was this feeling of, where I was working at the time, if I worked at home, I almost felt like everybody thought I was skiving, because I was at home waiting for a package or whatever it may be. And it was this feeling that I had. It wasn't, you know, it actually wasn't a thing in the office. People just thought, Kaylee's waiting for a package, but it was a feeling that you had. So it is important that, you know, if you are, for instance, a hybrid working team, that you all feel comfortable with how you choose to work, how you choose to get in, whether or not you think you're always going to be late, or your train is always going to be delayed, or you can't get there. And you're so right. It's a lot more than just transport. It is a feeling that you have every day, especially if you are doing hybrid working. So important. You mentioned Tim, because Tim, I was going to say, because Tim has been recruiting for some time. Tim, do you have any strategies that you found successful in finding talent outside of those major cities?
I think you've just touched on the most important part of this topic. It's for companies to take a position as to how they feel about hybrid working. You know, there's a lot of newsworthy items right now about companies trying to bring people back to the office and going the other way post-COVID. You know, obviously we went pretty much fully remote, a lot of us, during the COVID and post-COVID era. And there's now a lot of discussion about bringing people back to the office. And what we're seeing is that creates a bit of confusion. People don't quite know what the company's position is. And I think Rachel's absolutely right. That whole employee branding piece, so you tell your people, this is how we are, this is how we approach hybrid working. But if you don't actively embrace it and are seen to embrace it, it'll be seen as a marketing tool, unfortunately. And we do hear of companies, you've mentioned it earlier, that say that they do offer hybrid or flexible working, but actually the feeling when you request to work from home is that actually it's not quite the done thing. So it's really important companies take a position. At the moment, people are nervous about, you know, moving roles potentially. It's an interesting economic climate. You know, you don't want to make a mistake and be kind of, you know, last in, first out, if that makes mistakes. So people are really keen to make sure if they move jobs, for example, that the companies they're moving to embrace truly and fully the hybrid or remote working model. And that's essential. But you've got to live it, you've got to breathe it, your language has to support it, and people have to, you know, genuinely feel that that's something the company embraces as a benefit. And I have to say, I speak to a lot of companies that aren't doing that very well at the moment. And so their employees remain confused at best and nervous at worst as to whether or not they should, you know, do a work from home day. So it's hugely important that companies take a position, and that's the biggest advice we're giving to people right now. Tell the world, tell your staff, tell the, you know, potential employee pool that you're talking to how you feel about working remotely, and be genuine and honest about the thing. If you want people back in 1 or 2 days a week, tell them, but tell them why and tell them how it's going to work. But if you are going to embrace it fully and truly. That's my recommendation to customers right now.
Yes, and especially if you're new in a role as well, if the company says, you know what, 1 to 2 days you're in the office, and then says, but actually in the future, we aim to bring everybody back in at some point, they need to be upfront and honest about that. Because you're right, especially in the tech industry, there is competition for good talent. And if somebody is really good and they just think, you know what, actually this turned into 5 days in the office, I have a very long commute, it's very expensive, I wasn't expecting that, then they're just going to go elsewhere. And I do agree it is a tough time at the moment to leave, but there's still going to be those top companies that are looking for top talent, and they're going to say, you know what, you can do hybrid hours, we are honest about how we work. So you're right, I think it's just that transparency with candidates.
Yep.
Jake, yourself, I'm not going to ask you about recruiting, since you're not a recruiter, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about remote working, which is something that you do. So how has remote working impacted your productivity and work-life balance compared to working in a traditional office environment?
Totally, yeah. So a little bit about my background, because I've never actually worked in a traditional office setting. This is my first tech role, my first, office, come to work, kind of dress up for the Zoom call kind of role. I've worked in non-traditional backgrounds. I've worked in wilderness therapy just out of college. I've worked in ranch therapy, which is similar to wilderness therapy, and I've worked in mountain hospitality out here in New Hampshire, up in the mountains. So definitely a career pivot. So I can't speak to how it compares to previous office environments, but I can definitely speak to the work-life balance and the benefits that I have now as compared to maybe traditional jobs that you might find in a rural area, because those were jobs that presented themselves to me in person. So with regards to work-life balance, remote work has definitely allowed me to make more of a non-work community. Previously in different roles, I've lived with coworkers. I've, made friends with people who work elsewhere in the company if we are in person. But now I have friends at work, of course. I get on Zoom calls every day with people who live in Michigan, who live in Alabama. But my non-work friends, the people I live with, the people I associate with, my free time on my weekends, are people who have no idea what it's like to work in tech. Like they're the people who still work in wilderness therapy, the people who still work in mountain hospitality. So it's nice to create that community, and it's really easy to disconnect from work for me. So as far as work-life balance goes, I don't think about work in my off time because I don't live with my coworkers anymore. And I think that's really nice for long-term job sustainability, which is really nice. As far as productivity goes, my work is far more flexible now. I don't have to go in person and be there for 8 hours a day. Previous roles, like I said, mountain hospitality, I lived in the mountains for a week at a time. I couldn't be home. I couldn't go grocery shopping. I couldn't go to the post office or anything like that. So now work is far more flexible, especially, Zencare.co is a really high trust environment. So I have 8 hours of work that I need to get done in a specific day, but I don't have to do them all in those 8 hours. I can work 4 hours and I can get out for a ski for 2 hours and then come back and work. As long as I'm making those meetings in the morning, which I'll talk about later, I can just kind of like be flexible. So that's really nice. So I feel that I can be more productive in my most productive times. If I'm really good at like 2 hours in the morning and then I have like in the middle of the day and then right before I go to bed, like everything is coming to me, I can work in those hours to make sure I'm getting my work done, which is really nice. That being said, that is kind of a double-edged sword because it feels like I can work all day since I'm not going into an office and leaving work behind. I can, sometimes, I'll be going to bed at night and think like, oh, just one more thing. Or like yesterday, for instance, I was headed out for a ski. I had all my stuff on and I got a Slack message from a coworker that was like, hey, do you mind doing this? When you come back, no worries. But it was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to enjoy myself unless I do it. So it's really hard to get out the door.
Do you set those boundaries as well? I suppose that's something as you go to kind of, it's okay to set boundaries with an employer to say, you know what, I'm doing this at this time. But it is difficult because you are right. When you are remote, it's almost, and I know a lot of us struggled with that in COVID. It was kind of like, we all struggled to switch off because it was like messages all the time. And it was almost like we hadn't got used to saying, this is not my work time. I just need to do something else.
Yeah, I think it's a practice for me. I definitely didn't start out good at setting those boundaries. In fact, I think, we could talk about imposter syndrome. That was something that prevented me from thinking that I even could or I deserved to set those boundaries for the first maybe like a couple of months of my work. But people encouraged me, mentors, friends at the company were like, block out times on your calendars. You're getting work done. There's that positive feedback loop of like, your work is great. We don't care when you do it. So it's probably been within the past year that I've started setting those chunks out in my calendar, setting those boundaries, saying no to meetings. If somebody who works on the West Coast might be messaging me at their lunchtime when it's like my quitting time, I might be like, I'll get to this tomorrow. And people seem to understand that, which is nice.
Yeah, definitely. And we mentioned transport a little bit in our conversation before. What is that like for you in the States? Because it's very different in the UK. We travel a lot by train. Yourself, I take it you know, your mode of transport when you do want to get to work, if you do want to visit an office, is a lot different compared to in the UK. What is that like for you, and basically why you chose a job where you can work remotely?
Yeah, totally. So one thing I was going to say when you're talking, Tim, is that I think especially in the States, especially in rural areas in the States, and for instance, the town I live in is about 500 people full time. It's a big vacation destination, but like not many people live here, not many tech opportunities directly in the town. But remote work is really popular here. One thing I was going to say is that the difference between in-person and hybrid is only so much in the States, whereas hybrid and remote is vastly different. If there's a company that even has a hint of hybrid work, I can't look at that because there's no chance that I'm going to be able to like move to San Francisco, which is a hugely different living expense than where I live in New Hampshire, where it's a lot more affordable. So I can't even entertain hybrid or in person. It has to be remote. That being the reason, because the transport to the city hubs, the city centers, you know, it's 5 hours for me to get to New York by car. I'm so car dependent up here, and everybody around me, I live with 3 people, we all have cars. There's no train that comes into our town. There's buses that are unreliable. There's scenic trains that might be able to take you to like a little bit outside. You could like Uber to a city from there, but it's tough. So it is really car dependent. And fortunately, my company doesn't have hybrid work. We're fully remote all over the country, so it works for us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's almost like, you know, when you are looking for jobs, as you said, you just have to select certain roles that obviously are only remote. But obviously as tech talent, there are lots of companies that are still going to want to employ you. It's just making sure that those employers are open to everybody, not just those that can come into the city and come into the office all the time, because it doesn't work for everybody. Tim, I wanted to ask you a little bit about smaller cities and rural areas. How can they leverage their unique attributes to attract and retain tech talent? So it's not always the cities that draw people in. The smaller rural areas, they also have a lot of advantages as well.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of trend towards move out of the big hubs right now. The main emphasis that we hear is that lovely phrase, quality of life. That when you come out of the big metropolis style cities, obviously there's lower costs. We've talked about the dreaded commute and the cost of the commute. And I think a lot of people now are looking for a more greener lifestyle as well. So I do think there is a huge quality of life draw to come out of a stressful conurbation where, you know, the moment you get on the train, your blood pressure is going to go up. The moment you're walking through a busy city, you know, I do it most days in central London, and it's not the most enjoyable experience compared to walking through maybe a slightly quieter village experience. However, you know, I have to say that the smaller villages have to offer a quality of life, of course, but there has to be more than that, I think, for these villages to attract people. There has to be a real friendliness to remote workers. As we've heard from Jake there, you've got to have some decent infrastructure at home, you know. So we've been talking about, you know, good technology and sustainable broadband for when you're on the variety of kind of video calls that we do now. There should be some co-working spaces. It is nice to get out. You know, Jake's mentioned it's nice to get out during the day. Company security protocols nowadays are not too friendly about you just dropping into Starbucks, for example, and logging onto your company network. So more secure co-working spaces are really nice. There's an opportunity for a little bit of networking to go on, the WeWork style kind of environment that we're seeing a proliferation of nowadays. And other things, you know, the environments have to be children friendly. You know, you've got a lot of mums and dads that do have, you know, childcare arrangements. We've seen a lot of desire for dog friendly environments, would you believe, lately, you know, so people can really enjoy that, you know, that kind of family feel when you're going to work. But again, on top of that, good schools, good recreation facilities. Jake's mentioned there, you know, just getting out for a ski really changes his life. And, you know, just being able to walk down the park, you know, find a nice cup of coffee somewhere a little bit more greener than being in, you know, one of these big cities, I think is essential. And again, on top of that, you know, we want these little villages to be friendly towards tech startups. the tech startups that are always keen to keep an eye on costs, quite often like non-city based environments. You can come out, you save a little bit of money, you have a little bit more peace and quiet, you can build potentially a culture of kind of remote, hybrid, and some on site as well. But there has to be a really kind of decent infrastructure there. You have to feel like you can work beautifully whilst not being in one of these big central locations. And I think finally, what we're also seeing as well is, and Rachel will probably add a lot more to this than me, is that if you do want to attract people to your location, you have to be able to market and brand your village to people, potentially considering a move out of central Manchester, central Leeds, central London, these big hubs. You have to be able to get the message out there. So using the social media platforms, showcasing successful experiences with guys like Jake. Look, his company must be delighted. They've got a great software engineer that manages to work extremely successful in a fully remote environment. If you can highlight these little case studies to people, it encourages people that are thinking about it, moving away. It just pushes them over the edge. And particularly when they go to these locations, they see it's nice and friendly. There's places to work. You can look after your family well. You can have a much more pleasant set of recreational kind of activities during your day and still get your job done. Then I think there's a lot of trend towards moving out right now. We're seeing lots of little teams popping up, all over the country, rather than having 500 people in one kind of central city location. Now we've got lots of little hubs popping up in different locations, and quite often they are empty. People use them for occasional meetings and remote gatherings rather than full-time working environments. So, yeah, I think it's a trend that will continue. The cost of travelling, the commuting, the environmental concerns play a big part in people's choice on their next job.
Definitely. I love the fact that you just brought up about community, almost like community hub and co-working spaces, because that's become quite a relatively new thing as well, because with the pandemic, everybody went home and you had to stay at home, and then it became, we don't necessarily want to go back to the office all the time, but there are those people that don't want to work from home because there are distractions, but also they don't want to pay, for instance, a full price train ticket to get all the way into London, where they could just do something a little closer to home. But you are right, you still need a work environment where you're productive, and it's not just you turning up at Starbucks or Costa's and just thinking, I can't really work in here because it's very loud, I can't take calls, that kind of thing. So there are so many little community hubs that have now popped up of great places to work, and that's a very new thing. It's like half the price of a ticket, or you could drive there if it's local, and you still don't have those distractions if people do have lots of noise and lots of things going on at home. So yeah, it's kind of another trend that has popped up recently. Rachel, Tim just kind of touched upon this about marketing your company well, and I wanted to ask you that about working in marketing, actually. Your advice on what you would give to tech professionals considering relocating to small cities or rural areas for career opportunities. That kind of touches on what Tim just said there. A lot of it is about marketing your company well, isn't it? And kind of how that company comes across to tech professionals, when they make that decision on where they'd like to work.
Yeah, I think going right back to something we touched on, I think Jake mentioned high trust and Tim definitely mentioned it as well. But I think the key thing is about setting expectation as a company so that people understand exactly what's expected in terms of time in the office, time out of the office. Is it hybrid? To Jake's point about, hybrid wouldn't work for him, or is it fully remote, or are you expected to be in? That's going to be very much dictated by your customers ultimately as well. We spend a lot of time on customer site, so that's really, really key. So I think there are considerations when you're looking to move into areas. I think building your network is really important. We've got a really rich sort of ecosystem of networks and groups here within Leeds and in the sort of in the surrounding towns and villages. It's an absolute hub of obviously digital kind of digital jobs. I think 22% of digital health jobs are based in West Yorkshire currently. So there's a lot of emphasis on groups and networks and lots going on. I think that's really key for people when they're coming into you know, a new area, new communities, because instantly you're meeting people, peers, people that are got similar interests to you. You've got that little support network as well, which I think is really key if you're looking to, if you're looking to sort of relocate as well. You need to look at your transport links, you need to understand what your employer is expecting of you and make sure that you can obviously deliver that as well, so that you're both set up for success, your employer and you as well. And I think, do your research, like anything, research, to make sure that you're making the right decision. I think that's really critical, and how that's packaged up, ask those questions of, somebody that you're looking to work for, do your research, talk to other people, maximize your network. I'm a massive believer in LinkedIn and getting out there and, Eventbrite and meeting people. And obviously I would say that because I'm in marketing, but it's really, really key. It's massive. You can benefit so much from it. Jake touched on it with having lived with people he worked with. I mean, I can't imagine that, Jake. Hats off to you. But also, no, I love them really. But that is like, taking that work-life balance way out of kilter. But yeah, what's in it for you? What's your employer expecting? Setting expectations, doing your research, and making sure that you've got a really strong sort of infrastructure and network around you, I think is really key to making sure that you're happy, because we spend loads of time at work. We want to be happy, don't we?
Yes, definitely. And I think almost that question as well is kind of whether or not you're taking a new job and you're relocating for a new job, which is one thing. And then also just looking at it again, I was thinking actually a lot of people during the pandemic decided to relocate and stay in their current job as well. So it's almost, again, that making sure that you're happy with the choice that you make, and that your employer is well aware of, your plans, and that it's okay that you're relocating and now you're going to be doing hybrid working. Because previously, if you were in 5 days and you suddenly said, you know what, I'm moving to the top end of the UK suddenly and I won't be in, you have to be really honest with that, about that to your employer. And so you have to ensure that they're okay with where you're going to be working, and that you're still going to be productive. So I suppose it's a new job, or if you're staying in an existing role and you're deciding to, you might want to change your work-life balance, and you might decide as a family, we want to move somewhere rurally and I want to keep my current job as well. And it's having that discussion. I don't think those discussions are as rare as they used to be. I think a lot of people did make that decision during the pandemic, and a lot of people are still thinking, you know what, I do want to move out to somewhere and have a better work-life balance. So yeah, it's just weighing it all up with your employer, obviously. Jake, I wanted to touch upon, I've seen a question come in actually that is connected to what I wanted to ask you next. I wanted to ask you about, how do you ensure effective communication and collaboration within distributed teams, especially considering different time zones and cultural backgrounds? And somebody has actually dropped in a question that is quite similar. They've said, I've started a new role and I'm managing a global team from France to California to Australia. Do you have any advice for keeping in contact and managing people across multiple time zones without me working all hours of the day? How do you manage that yourself? You mentioned a little bit about sometimes you can struggle with those boundaries at the moment, but if you are across different time zones, especially if they're globally, how do you do that yourself, working across different time zones?
For sure, yeah. First off, thanks for the question in the Q&A section. I'll answer it as best I can. I can answer it in the context of, we're just a national network at this point, so we're not international, but hopefully some of these things do apply to like a global context. So yeah, ZenCare is all remote. They started all remote during prior to the pandemic, and then in the pandemic they started hiring and growing because we are a therapy company. People were all looking for therapy during the pandemic. So it helps that we're all remote. There's no disconnect between, like we had this in-person meeting, you weren't there kind of thing. So that helps us. We also, one thing that ZenCare did recently, I want to just mention this because it was really fun, is I work in a small product team. It's me, another software engineer, and then our product manager. ZenCare paid for their flights to come visit me up in New Hampshire. So they flew into Boston. I drove down to Boston and picked them up and brought them up here, which is about a 3-hour drive. But we were able to have some, not only like fun in-person time, go for some hikes and stuff like that, but we also were able to brainstorm one of the new product features that we were going to build. And so that was a productive company time as well as like a nice bonding team time. So that really helped our group cohesion in a remote environment. As far as how to have effective communication on distributed teams, I think there's a number of different things, and these might be kind of obvious to some people, might be new to some people who are just jumping in, but I can mention a few. One of them is the Scrum methodology. We use a very sequential way to go through, product planning, how we meet, how we talk about things. Like I mentioned, I can do about 8 hours of work on my own before I need to come back in and check to my product manager about what needs to happen next. And so we'll have meetings Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then that's really the only required meetings that we have. Everything else can be done on our own time. So allowing people to work when they can, if you just have some like brief time zone overlaps and meeting in that one central spot, that can be really helpful. We use remote tools like Slack and Linear so that we can keep working and keep communicating in off hours. We don't have to have direct face-to-face conversation. We also have defined project phases. So if I start working on a feature, I can get it all the way through to the QA section, and I don't have to sit there and wait while somebody tests it. I can go and work on something else. I can be working on 4 different things at a time as all of those features go through their own defined project phases, which is nice. I would also say that the following things like really help company warmth and help encourage openness and group cohesion in a remote environment. If all we're doing is meeting and talking about work, and Slack can be kind of tough. But I had a mentor that when I got hired at ZenCare, they were somebody who we would meet once a week and just talk about not work, distinctly not work. We could meet and talk about what it's like for him to live in Brooklyn, like what his life is like, what his band was like. And that was really nice to just like feel like I had a buddy at work, so that then I could go to other places and feel like I had a warm community to then talk to. So I'd really encourage those like non-work kind of meetings, casual conversation before meetings like we had before this. That was really fun. And then of course, company events, even if you're a fully online company, being able to have those in-person events, maybe once a year, if you can afford it, that's really fun. Also, I would say this is one thing I do want to shout out is limiting conversation. I think being able to have open and warm conversation is important, and being able to operate without communication is also really important. That's not just to say like communication is annoying. I don't want to read emails all day, which maybe they are, but I think that not having in-person communication all the time can really promote written communication, which can help with this asynchronous work where I have to write down all the specs of something and pass it on to somebody who's going to wake up in 4 hours and then read it. Written communication can define things really well. It can document things into the future, so we have something to look back and reference, and it can now allow for more free workflows. So I think there's a benefit to how we have communication, and then also like being very intentional about when we do communicate.
Yes, I love that. And I'm assuming as well that you, it takes time to grow a culture like this and find the way that you like to work and how the company works. And some of that can really, it can really dictate whether or not you stay at a company and whether or not you want to stay there and whether or not you're happy there. Because I remember working at a company where we had lots of platforms that we worked in, and you would get tasks dropped in, and it would be great. They thought it was great. It wasn't, because for me, all I could see was tasks being dropped in, and I had no communication with anybody for most of the day. And I just picked up my task, did what I needed, ticked it off, it was done. And mentally, I was just thinking, I just have an inbox that is just this is all I do. And it almost like it needed some variety there of all the different ways that you can communicate with teams across different time zones, instead of just feeling like, I just have a list of tasks that I go through and that is it. And it takes a while to get used to what you want to do, how you want to communicate, and also how your team members like to check in as well. Whether you just call somebody up for a chat every now and then can really help, especially if you work remotely. That can really help, just to check in with somebody in the day. And as you said, just not to talk about work, and sometimes talk about work can make such a difference. Tim, can I ask you a little bit about how do you see the evolving landscape of remote work influencing the future of talent acquisition and company culture in the tech industry? I have got a couple of people in here who are asking about whether or not you think that we'll fully go back to 5 days a week in the office, which kind of ties into that, about the evolving landscape of remote work. Do you think that we're going to stick with that? Do you think companies will call us all back in 5 days a week? What do you think?
This is a fantastic question. And this is the one thing that I'm seeing almost constantly in the kind of employment world right now is, that position that companies take. And we're seeing everything. We're seeing people that truly embrace the full remote, like Jake's business, and do a great job of it, and have invested time in thinking about new ways to collaborate. And we're seeing the Elon Musk style, which is everybody back to the office 5 days a week, and if you don't like it, leave your swipe pass at the reception. And there is everything in between. The critical bit, as I said earlier, is that companies just need to be critically clear about where they stand with this. Quite a lot of it comes from, if I may say, on high. And I think I can probably say this, being of the slightly more mature group on the call here. Some of the people that run businesses tend to be slightly older, and so they've grown up with maybe 80-90% of their life being in an office 5 days a week, from 8 in the morning till 7 at night, with a sandwich at your desk. And so the modern post-COVID flexible approach to work seems to attract suspicion from some of the more mature generation, should I say. If they can't see it, they don't necessarily trust it, and that has caused huge issues for talent acquisition teams. Talent acquisition need to know the proposition to the employee. Rachel was absolutely bang on with it earlier. Getting your branding right, getting your message right as to what it's like to work here is essential. And I think companies are still struggling a little bit with that. So having that clarity is essential, because for talent acquisition teams, recruiting a remote team versus recruiting an on-site team versus recruiting a hybrid team has huge different implications. An on-site culture is very, very different. Rachel, again, was the nail on the head earlier. If I'm based in central London, then I'm probably only going to have a catchment area of an hour or so on the train outside of London, and then I'm done. I won't be able to attract people to my business 5 days a week. Whereas a remote opportunity, Jake's shown what a fantastically international, culture they've got going on down there. Our business has staff right across the world. We have people in India, we have people in Poland, we have them in Spain, in Italy, in France, and the remoteness of that gives us a truly global, truly international feeling as a culture. If I go back 10 years working in central London, everybody in recruitment was from London. That was it. You had to kind of work close to the office. So the challenges for talent acquisition teams are very, very separated. You also have to look at, Jake's mentioned it, the kind of person that you employ on a fully remote job. You do need to look at how they learn, how they like to absorb, how they like to work. It is a different interviewing style as well for us, for someone that wants to work fully remote, because they do have different pressures. They still have pressures. They're just different to the pressures that you get slogging into the office every day to sit at your desk from 9 to 5:30. But again, a 9 to 5:30 office environment holds its own challenges. So talent acquisition teams need to be really well prepared for what that company culture is, and to make sure that they hire, recruit, interview, and search accordingly. And that's something we're seeing a huge amount of at the moment, is that the company culture in remote companies is naturally different to a company culture where everybody piles into a skyscraper in a city every day. And you really just have to work on that, because the way that you need to acknowledge and accommodate people in both of those different environments is different, and you have to think differently as a talent acquisition team. We do a lot more, as Jake said, kind of online collaboration with our remote teams, potentially more than we do, with some of our in-office teams. But it's essential, because the moment you start to feel a bit detached or not part of the team, or a little bit kind of isolated, then performance does go down a little bit. So for us, it's, make sure you get your proposition right. Make sure you tell your employees what your company believes about that. And it's interesting, I noticed one of the comments in the Q&A there is that quite often companies say that it's hybrid, or say that there's an element of remote, but when you actually get there, it's not as remote as you might like. And so Rachel's advice, again, I thought was superb earlier. Do your research in anything that you do. If you're thinking about moving to a different location, different company, research it. Use Google, use Glassdoor, use some of these social media platforms. LinkedIn is full of stories about companies that will or won't, accommodate the more remote working person right now. So research is everything. There's big networks out there, and everyone will tell you what it's like to work at ABC company. And I think it's essential that you do a lot of that before you decide to consider moving, either out of a city or into a remote role, or even back into a 5-day-a-week role. I can tell you, from having gone from fully remote to back into the office 5 days a week, it's substantially different. the kind of whole culture and environmental feel. So, and it doesn't suit everybody at all, particularly when people over the last 2 years have got used to that flexibility, that remoteness, maybe picking up one of the kids from school one day a week at 3 o'clock, you know, and working your day around that. To suddenly take that out of your life again has a negative connotation. So not everyone's coming back to work 5 days a week, but we are seeing a defined move for people to pop in 1 or 2 days a week at the minimum right now. They want people to, and it's almost show your face kind of request that we're getting at the moment. A little bit of collaboration, bit of water cooler, coffee room chat that companies think is good for, you know, for businesses that are going through maybe a tougher economic climate.
Yes, definitely. And I think some of that comes down, we mentioned company culture a little bit throughout this as well, but Jake, I used to work at a US company, and they were very open and transparent about what was expected of me, but also it came down to a lot of it was trust. And if I worked from home, it was fine. If I wanted to come in a bit later and work a little bit later, sometimes I'd work Sundays, and it didn't bother me because they were so flexible on when I could work and where I could work. And it actually meant that people just stayed a lot longer because that company was so open and transparent and just wanted to hold on to talent. That I felt like that was a very an American culture, that when I worked at UK companies, it was like they wanted me chained to my desk 5 days a week. And Tim, yes, they did let me out for a sandwich every now and then. But when I moved to an American company and we were working in London, it was so different. And their open vacation policy as well basically meant take as much as you like. But it actually meant I took less than I should have because they were so open about it. So I think as well, it is a cultural thing, and whether or not your company trusts you to work and to be productive as well.
But one thing I must mention is that in all the research we do from all candidates that we speak to right now, be they freelance candidates, be they permanent candidates, money is no longer the top driver in what people look for. It is not even in the top 4. Flexibility and that discussion around the working practices. And flexibility, by the way, isn't about remote or hybrid or full-time. Flexibility is about, can I work from home on Tuesday afternoon because I've got a package arriving, I've got a doctor's appointment, my child needs, I've got a parents' evening, or whatever it is. It's the company approach to being flexible towards people. Flexibility is number 1, and then the remote or hybrid or on-site working pattern is the second that we're seeing in all cases right now. So it's gone from being something that wasn't even on the list of things that would be discussed 10 years ago about, can I work from home on a Friday? You'd be in trouble with your boss. Now they are definitely the top 2 requirements from anybody considering their working life and their environment. So it's literally flipped on its head in the last couple of years.
Yes, I've seen that in a few surveys. Actually, you're absolutely right that what young people in particular are asking for, and when they go for a job, it's not the salary, they're thinking about culture and lots of other things. And whereas it used to be, how much am I getting paid? But yeah, it's very, very, very different now. Rachel, we've got time. I've just got a question in there that I wanted to ask you for an answer for. I've got about a minute. Somebody has said that they're considering moving out of Berlin, where I'm currently based, but they're worried about growth opportunities that will be available to them. Will my career stall if I leave the tech hub? Do you have any advice for people that are thinking, should I leave a tech hub? Will I just not find another job? What will happen?
That's really interesting because obviously Berlin is a massive tech hub. So yeah, and I'd imagine that it's really, really vibrant. And I would imagine that a lot of people felt like that about, I moved from the south to the north. I lived in the south most of my life, and I've been in the north for sort of 12 years now. And moving from the south to the north is a very marked difference. Little things, like transport, for example. The roads are much more full of potholes in the north, things like that. But there is a marked difference, and I think I would say that it goes back down really to research. I can't imagine that there aren't little interesting digital hubs and tech hubs that exist outside of, in surrounding Berlin. So here, obviously, in Leeds, where we're based, we've got Manchester very close, but then actually you've got lots of other cities that are much smaller, and towns that are building up their own digital and tech hubs and communities, and they're starting to be known for different types of tech. So everybody has their own kind of specialism, if you like, that's coming out of the cities, and there's a lot of intercollaboration, but it means that, you know, there's a lot of opportunity as well for people to move around between those towns, between those you know, between those cities. So I think, you know, again, it comes down to research, putting the feelers out there, reaching out to some people in your network on LinkedIn and things like that, looking at the companies that are out there that are working in the field and what they're doing and the type of opportunities and job roles that they've got, you know, and to see, really, to evaluate whether or not it's you know, viable. I used to work in London, and I thought, oh God, you know, I like working in London, it's really busy. Will there be any opportunities for me if I don't work in London? And actually my career has flourished in the north. So yeah, don't be afraid. Sometimes you have to take the leap, but just do a little bit of research first to make sure that you're going into it, you know, with your eyes open, would be my advice.
Yeah, that's lovely advice. You have to put your toe in the water and the sea will part, as they say.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We are out of time already. Thank you, everybody that contributed questions as well. We will follow up with the speakers because there were so many wonderful questions in here. So thank you, everybody, for being so active as always on our webinars. But thank you to my wonderful panelists, Rachel, Tim and Jake. Thank you for sharing your insights today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kaylee.
Thank you very much for joining us. And to our community, as always, thank you for joining us. Please take a look over on our new community platform. If you haven't already joined the waitlist, you can join the other 1,200 ladies already on that waitlist at community.shecanco.io. Go and sign up. We open in March, and there are lots of ladies in there all looking to share their experiences in tech and to help each other in their careers as well. So you'll find lots of wonderful resources in there to help you. But to everybody listening, thank you so much for joining us as always, and we hope to see you again next time. Thank you all. Bye.